Hello, friends and neighbors. Welcome in the light, where laughter's the answer and hearts are shining bright. With calloused hands and wits, so raise your sharp. Let's praise a place where love ignites the spark. In the field of dreams, where sweat and hope combine, we'll raise our voices high and toast to the divine. Be your best and let your spirit always rise. Give thanks for every moment under sunny skies. Be the sunny side of someone else's life. Share your light and joy through struggle and strife. Keep your heart open and your soul always bright. Together we will share this sunny side life. Be the sunny side of someone else's life. Share your light and joy through struggle and strife. Keep your heart open and your soul always bright. Together we will share this sunny side life.
Hello, friends and neighbors. Welcome to Sunnyside. Glad you're with me once again on a Monday, and it's April. Well, of course, last week it was not April on a Monday. It was the very, very end of March. Went out like a lion, and so now here we are in the month of April, when the showers bring spring flowers. And so in anticipation of those spring flowers, I spent a little bit of time on Saturday burning off the wildflower patch that I have. It's really a strip. It's not a patch. It's a strip that we have along a tree line, and planted that about a year ago. I think I told you about that. Came in pretty good, but I was told that if you burn if you burn that wildflower patch and remove all of the detritus, the dead grass and whatnot on the top, that it'll come back and just be boom, full of blooms and flowers for the summer. So I'm looking forward to that. It worked pretty good. It was a little bit windy, but there wasn't much threat of it getting out of control. I kept it in a pretty straight strip like it was supposed to be. A couple times it did get away from me a little bit, and I had to slap it down with a shovel, but nothing too significant there. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those spring flowers turn into throughout the summer and even into the fall. I noticed when I was baling hay last year that we still had flowers throughout the entire time. So I'm really looking forward to some beautiful flowers as they kind of highlight the tree line across the hayfield there as people drive by. So it is something that I was looking forward to. Got lots of spring projects that we have to get ready for. It's that time of year. If you remember, a couple of years ago, we did a show with the golf course superintendent at Bear Creek Golf Course, the golf course here in town, which is now open, by the way. And Mark Helgeson came in and shared his thoughts on really how to get your yard looking the best. And so that has stuck with me. You can go back to season 1 if you want and check out Mark's advice on how to do that. Just a little cleaning up, little fertilizing. I got some reseeding to do because some snow movement that I did late in the winter, early spring got a little messy. So I've got some things to do there. And probably just like you, just getting ready for summer, which in the Midwest we'll have a moment of spring, and then ta-da, it's summer again, and so on and so forth. So time flies, and that's really, I guess everybody says that, so it must be true, because it does seem to really blow by, and it certainly did this weekend. And there were things that reminded me of that, and I'll talk about those things a little bit later on in this show. But I want to just cover a few things that did happen in the past week. First, I'm kind of not in any particular order here. On Friday, I had the opportunity to. It's not an opportunity. It is always an opportunity. Let's keep it positive. I went to the legislative forum. So in Iowa, and probably wherever you live too, that the local legislators, the folks that work at the state house, the senators and the reps for your area will come on by, and they'll visit the towns, communities, et cetera, in every county in their districts. And they do this however many times. For us, it's 2 or 3 times. This was the last time that they do it. Now that we're into April in Iowa, the way that it works is the legislative session goes from January through April. And by that time, they're supposed to have all all of their business done. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer, and they have to have extended sessions because they can't make up their minds or agree on anything. But by this point, you're really talking about most of the things have, that are in the funnel have been legislatively have either been put on the schedule or they've disappeared and you won't see them again. And so when they do these legislative forums, it's an opportunity for folks to come in and ask questions, address issues so that the legislators have the opportunity to answer those questions and hopefully get a good idea of the feel for the community. But what I've learned from being at these legislative sessions is that, or these listening forums, is that it's not always like people don't go to the legislative forums to say, you're doing a great job over there. They typically go to legislative forums to moan and complain, and some of the time they come in and they're armed with ideas or complaints. And you see that really throughout the country where people are spending time with these legislative forums at the federal level, the Congress men and women, representatives and senators that visit the hometowns and throughout their states are being met by people who ardently oppose them. So there's not a ton of support at these forums. Once you've won, quote unquote, an election, and your constituents that got you there are satisfied with what's going on, those same constituents usually don't show up because they're busy, they're working, they figure we've got this under control. And so it's the losing side, typically politically, that shows up at the forums and has things to say. That doesn't mean that those things don't need to be heard, because they absolutely do. A representative or a senator, or whether it's state or federal, our government, they work for us, so they, regardless of what party or ticket that they ran on, they still have the obligation to hear and answer for their decisions. Politicians have a hard time sometimes answering questions that are contrary to their political stance, and they try to make it more amenable to the people that are asking the questions that are opposed to them. And that's, I guess, what politicians are known for, right? The ability to talk out of maybe both sides of their mouth. I think it is refreshing when when a politician just tells them, no, I think that's a stupid idea. We're never going to do that as long as I'm in office. If you don't like it, vote me out, and let people, just simmer in their anger. But you don't see that very often. And of course, you want these things to be polite. And for the most part, this legislative forum was polite. People were upset about different things, as you might expect. And we've had Henry Stone, the majority whip for the Iowa State House here a couple of times, and he's also our local representative. He wasn't at the legislative forum on Friday, but some of the other senators and reps were for the area, and they answered a variety of questions. I was there primarily for the school board. Just wanted to represent the things that our school district is concerned about. And I got there a little bit late, to be honest with you. And so, I got there on time, but they pass around this, you write down what your questions are, and by the time I got there were so many people, and then they put them into categories, and education had like 6 or 7 questions on it. So I felt that at that point, more than likely they were going to cover what I wanted them to discuss, and they didn't. So I was irritated by that. I should have wrote my name down. But mostly I was there to talk about property tax reform. I was trying to very much become a tax-friendly state. In other words, friendly to the constituents. They have reduced income taxes in the state of Iowa. Everybody's down to that just over 4%. And so there is very little income tax in the state of Iowa. And that is a good thing, in my opinion. I don't particularly like taxes. I am a school board president, so I understand how taxes work and how we use those taxes to pay for the things that the public needs or asks for. The exchange of taxes is that you ultimately receive the best benefit that you possibly can for the amount that the community, the constituency, the taxpayers provide in finances. And I think what we found federally anyway, and what DOGE is exposing in many ways, is how inefficient those that spending is, and whether you could say it's corrupt. There certainly is some fraud involved. There's a ton of waste, and there is abuse. And so I would think, I mean, it's hard to argue for fraud, waste, and abuse, but I guess some people are, because then those are the same people that they're like, well, let's split some hairs about what do you consider fraud or waste or abuse. But in general, I would say we would all, as Americans, really prefer it if 100% of our tax dollars went to the actual service that is rendered. And the government's really bad at that. I think that the stats federally are it's like an 80-20 rule. So like maybe 20 cents of your dollar that is allegedly designated towards a certain thing actually is the other 80% is management fees. What does it cost? Now, certainly in the government, even in the school district, the largest expense is always going to be payroll for what would be considered the general fund, and that's going to be taking care of paying your teachers, paying those expenses, paying your utilities, that type of thing. But it's going to be payroll. It's going to be taking care of your employees and keeping them paid as we do. So that's a big chunk of what that money is for. In school districts, PEPL, that is something that's a tax or a levy that goes towards just facilities and maintaining our buildings and making improvements in our grounds and our buildings and the property that we own, and that includes properties that can be used for education. Should all be used for education, but the computers and whatnot. So there's kind of like your property, and then there's your people, and then there's a variety of other what they call silos. I'm not going to get into it; it's kind of boring. But the state legislature determines how public schools can spend their money in which ways they do that, and that is it's a bone of contention with me, because in Iowa we have a supermajority of Republicans in the House, the Senate, the governor. It's a very conservative state for the most part, I would say, and pretty red. And so I like that. I'm a conservative person, but I take umbrage with the Republican leadership or the party that, again, they always claim that they are for small government, lower taxes, and they just don't want that government overreach. And they like local control. That's what they always say. They're for business. They're pro-business. They want local control and all that. And I don't think they really mean it, particularly when it comes to education. I think that that's just a bald-faced lie. And the reason I say that is because the Republicans really enjoy, at least in the state of Iowa, telling the public schools what they can and cannot do. And even though every school district has its own elected school board, I'm one of those members in one of those districts, in all of the districts of the great state of Iowa. We all want to make our education the best that it can be for the price. Is what it boils down to. And studies have clearly shown that you can throw a lot of money at a public education system, and that doesn't necessarily mean that your students are better educated. So I get all of that, and I approach things conservatively from that. But at the end of the argument, as an elected official of the school district, it's our responsibility, me, my peers, and the administration with which we work, to make those decisions. And what the Republicans really enjoy doing is spending a lot of time trying to make laws that they then run through the state Department of Education that will then be enforced by the Department of Education, and each school district will be forced to comply, unless you're a private school district, in which case, in many cases, I will say, not all, but in many cases, it's just free reign. They can do whatever they want. They don't have the same oversight not in everything, but there are restrictions, obviously, in public school education as well. But that they don't have the same, they don't have to follow the same arduous rules, and particularly when it comes to money. So anytime that you, and rightfully so, you have tax dollars that we pay, whether we want to or not, and then we put it in the hands of our honorable legislators to determine how those funds are going to be used. We want them to be as efficient as they possibly can, and they then demand oversight. And they demand oversight so that you can be accountable for the dollars that the taxpayers spend. And so if they're going to spend money on public education, they want to have accountability and accounting practices, and they want to perform audits of all sorts on those public schools so that they can be sure that the public schools are using the tax dollars that are provided to them efficiently. And I think, there's value in that. Obviously, we want to know that you should be able to report to your community that you're doing well. Our community does, in most school districts, by the way, in the state of Iowa, and I would assume across the country, in most cases, manage their money very well. You have to, otherwise you don't exist. So like it's not as maybe corrupt as some politicians would like to make it sound, but there's always room for improvement, and we're always seeking ways to improve as well in our local school district. And so the frustration is that they don't have those same rules for the private schools. There's not the same auditing process. Some of the things that they state that they have to teach in a K-12 curriculum for the public schools, they don't apply to the private schools. And so there are costs associated and management fees associated with making all of those things jive. Every time that there's a new rule or regulation or law from the state, the public schools must comply, and there's consequences if they don't. And in Iowa, at least in the last couple of years, those consequences can include some pretty stiff fines and maybe even jail time, for administrators or officials if they don't comply. That's the same situation for the private schools. And so in this legislative forum, lots of people were complaining about that. And last year, Iowa did pass a law we're now in the second year of a 3-year program where people are able to send their kids to a private school and receive state supplemental aid. The money follows the kid is the argument. And as a person of financial libertarian ideas, I concur. They are also taxpayers, and they can go and take their money with them to whichever private school they wish to go to. Those private schools, they do not have the ability to tax, but their patrons still pay those taxes. They're still paying those property taxes, and they're still paying their income taxes like every other Iowan, in addition to tuition, which is the only thing private schools can do. And I believe that public schools are perfectly positioned to outcompete private schools, particularly in small town America, where there isn't as much private school competition. But most importantly, in small rural districts, we still have a connection to community that is similar to the what makes a private school in a larger community attractive. Mainly, I would say the spiritual side of the private schools, which are primarily religious-based schools. They have an ethos that you hope, if you're sending your kids to a private school, is connected to a religious upbringing. And the public schools and a lot of the advocates for public schools have just an ardent desire and it's a mistake, to be honest. And it's a mistake in interpretation of a lot of things, which I did here too at this legislative forum. But it's a mistake to separate yourself from the value of faithful upbringing. And rural communities, because they're small and maybe there's half a dozen churches in town or more, and maybe even people in town go to church. Maybe they go to church at a more regular basis than folks in larger communities do, more secular communities. So rural community schools have an advantage in the sense that they are still fairly connected to the religious community in their small rural community. And for that reason, there's an ethos that travels and expectations that come with living in a community such as this, in our case, and in most small rural communities across the state of Iowa and probably the country. However, Forest City also has a university, of which I am an alum and a big supporter of Waldorf University. And Waldorf is a Lutheran university, has ties and has started as a Lutheran prep school in 1903 and has continued on with that Lutheran heritage for the last 122 years. So outstanding. And there was a period of time when they were privately owned by, they were a faithful family. I don't think they were Lutheran, but there always has been a Lutheran foundation. In fact, the foundation bought Waldorf University back just a few years ago or whatever. And so it's got a religious affiliation. Now, as an alum, and my parents are alums of Waldorf University here in Forest City, Iowa, they are, and my grandmother and grandparents, I mean, we go way back with Waldorf University. And I don't think any of us were ever Lutheran. To my knowledge, none of us were Lutheran. But there was a Lutheranism. I mean, there was a Lutheran college. And there was a time when the Lutheran Church, was pretty strict. That has long since passed. The Lutheran Church is long away from. They're just not a very conservative church anymore. Let's just put it that way. And so, is Waldorf University a Christian university historically? And I believe, and there certainly are. A ton of faithful people that are in the academic leadership positions, and I'm not questioning anybody's faith. I question, just like I do my own Methodist church, their leadership as a denomination, but there certainly are many faithful people there, and so there comes with that an ethos that would be that God is a part of our lives. And in a small community, that ethos, because the teachers live in town and you shop at the same grocery store and you see each other at all of the one high school basketball games, track meets, football games, volleyball, et cetera, all of those things. You see each other. There's only a few bars in town. So there's one golf course. Everybody knows each other in a small town. And expectations are tied in a good way in rural America to whatever the community's expectations happen to be. And if it's a godless community, like throughout, nothing new under the sun, if it's a godless community, then it's, probably all godless. So why I brought the university into this is because this is where these legislative forums are held, Waldorf has a heritage of Lutheranism and Christianity. And one of the topics that came up is not the tax relief part, not the property tax reform that I was there to give them advice on how to. So I'll just email it to them. But it was one of the things that came up was that chaplains. So one of the study bills that has kind of come forward and through this session is that the property that there would be so that schools would have a chaplain associated with a school district, a public school district. And they were not particularly keen on that idea. Some of the advocates for at the legislative session were advocates against having chaplains in schools, and I concur actually with that, but not for the same reason that they do. Once again, there's another side to why I agree with you, but I don't agree with your premise. It seems to me that the more educated that you are, or at least the most the more intentional you are about making other people aware how educated you are. Maybe that's the best way to do it. Whether it's by throwing letters behind your name or advancing, conversation with constant discussion of how educated and open you are to all of these liberal arts ideas, which I have a liberal arts degree, and so I get it. It's not that complicated to understand. You just try to see everything with all perspective. People mistakenly think that there is a separation of church and state in the Constitution. It's not there. A lot of times people reference what Jefferson was talking about when he wrote a letter to the Baptists, just to confirm that we're not going to establish a religion. In other words, there's not going to be an American, the United States of America will have the Church of England, we'll have the Church of the United States of America. We don't do that, and that's what the First Amendment talks about. And that's pretty established. It has been confused because people assume that this separation of church and state, which is a term that came from Jefferson's letter to the Baptists, which made sense because the Baptists were absolutely being persecuted by the Congregationalists, the Puritans, the Pilgrims, who they wanted to run New England, particularly, with an iron fist, as they had done since 1620. And so Jefferson, in his letter, in the 1780s, is saying, no, we're not doing that. Federally, we're not doing that. And states must abide by this federal constitution. And so you'll be able to be Baptist, and the Congregationalists will be Congregationalists, and the Episcopalians will be whatever they are, and so on and so forth. And the Catholics will have Rhode Island. Everything will be fine, or Maryland or whatever. So that's where that came from. It didn't mean that in the communities themselves that the role of the church wouldn't play a significant part of how each community, each county, township, state was run. And as a nation, that's a good thing. But of course, in my opinion, the faith begins in the family. It starts in the household. It begins with the parents who have a responsibility. That's why a lot of people get their child infant baptism, like they get their baby sprinkled, because this is where the Baptist in me comes out, because you're dedicating that child to Christ, and that you are going to raise that child in a Christian home, and you are going to teach that child the faith, preferably using the Bible. That's where it starts. Now, I would argue pretty successfully, I would say, that most people that are having their babies sprinkled in church and having them baptized are not biblical scholars, and they're probably not raising their children in a biblical home necessarily. I'd say most Americans are not being raised in a biblical home, which is too bad, because that'd be really great. And I think that so then we develop things like Sunday school. We get Sunday school for our kids, which is a 19th century practice of letting. So in the 1800s, it became clear that there were people, believe it or not, in towns and cities all over America, that there were people that weren't going to church. I know it's hard to imagine, but there were people that weren't going to church, and that the concern was that these unchurched children would then not have the ability to learn about Jesus. They wouldn't have the ability to learn about God. They wouldn't know the Bible, and therefore their lives wouldn't be directed or have the opportunity to be directed by the Holy Spirit. And then they too would perpetuate an unchurched family in the future, and so on and so forth. And they were right. In the 19th century, they were correct. So people chose and continue to choose. The majority chooses not to go to church, and their children then are raised in homes that are godless in many ways, in most ways, and without Christ. They may celebrate Christmas. They may celebrate the resurrection. They celebrate Easter, as we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, but maybe not the resurrection so much. And they can't explain it. and they're not good at explaining or using all of the stories in the Bible. That if you listen to the Bible in a Year last year here with us on the Sunny Side of Life and that project, there's 66 books in the Bible that we read, and and every verse has value. And so how many people have read or listened to the entire thing, study, and continue to develop themselves faithfully as adults, and then pass that on to their children as a useful part of their life? So that starts in the family. So I can see how. And by the way, I mean, so that to conclude that Sunday school situation, that's why Sunday school started. It was meant for the unchurched. The kids that had parents that were already in church. They didn't need to go to Sunday school, and then Sunday school became a thing for everybody, and then it became a social club, and then it's hopefully they get a whiff of Jesus. Is what Sunday school is in most cases across America today. So anyway. There are faithful people that are in the legislature of Iowa, and they are I would say, for example, Senator Guth from our area. He doesn't represent Forest City necessarily, but he used to, and he still comes to these legislative things. He's still a senator, very faithful person, very very ardent about his faith, really no bones, not apologetic for his faith whatsoever. Doesn't mean that all of his ideas are good. We do have a secular government, and that's the reality. We do have a secular government that works best when we have faithful people. That's how that works. But so some of these folks that are in the legislature of Iowa are faithful people, and they just want to have an opportunity to provide a chaplain in the schools. So I get it. We have a lot of problems in our society. We have a lot of problems. We have a lot of mental problems. We have a lot of family problems. We have a lot of confusion and an absence of leadership, and certainly an absence of faithful leadership in America. And so they probably look at this as I do and say, how can we fix this problem? And I thought, well, in the military, so here's a federal entity, United States Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard. They all have a Space Force, probably. They all have chaplains. There's a chaplain corps, a chaplaincy program in the military. George Washington established it before we were even a country. So 1775, the United States Army had chaplains. And chaplains are incredibly valuable, particularly to soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Chaplains come from all walks of faith, of all faiths, and they're brave people that do a great amount of work. They do their duty to serve the soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine in combat and out of combat, in garrison and in the field. And those chaplains are there to help the soldiers with their health spiritually, but also mentally and morally sometimes, and so on and so forth. Now, the chaplain corps in the military, there are rules about how, first of all, you have to be ordained, not like ordained like you got your ordination on the internet. You have to go through the essentially a master's program, and you have to. There's a series of things that you have to do to be like you're a legit pastor is what it amounts to. So there is an ordination process, and they do recognize a variety of faiths, and so there are chaplains from. Obviously, the Christian faith, from the Catholic faith, from the Jewish faith, the Sikh faith, you name it, they're out there. But predominantly, it's Christian chaplains from a variety of denominations, and most notably because it reflects the population to some degree, they're evangelical for the most part. However, the military And this is why I am opposed to maybe chaplains in schools. And it's for the same reason. The concern is that you can't proselytize. These allegedly faithful people in Christ arguing at the legislative forum against chaplains are just very concerned with proselytization, which I understand, because you would, what if your chaplain is from a completely unrepresented faith in your community, and then that person is proselytizing. So, for example, if you're living in a community like my town, and it's if I'm not saying it's 100% Christian as far as heaven has the books marked, but it's probably 90% these people are all celebrating Christmas and whatever they think Easter is. So there's that. And so if a person came in and was, say, a chaplain of the Muslim faith, of Islam, people would be up in arms. They would be furious. And so on that side of it, yeah, I can see the concern of proselytization by these folks. So I understand that argument. And when you consider the other elements of how schools and really anybody has to hire people, you can't discriminate somebody based on their faith. So you couldn't turn somebody down because they don't match your community structure with regarding their faith choice. So that is a problem. But my part of my issue is ultimately because of the chaplain corps in the military. They are allowed to conduct their services in their chapels in accordance with their background faith. The Catholics will provide their mass, and then that same space will be used by a Protestant person who, regardless of what denomination they come from, and that's usually fairly evident based kind of how they pray. To be honest with you, like you can tell a Baptist, and a Pentecostal, you can tell how people pray. You can tell how a Lutheran prays typically, and so but they're not necessarily advocating for that particular denomination in their chapel services. And those chapel services you're not forced to go to chapel in the military. Now, I always encouraged my recruits to go to the military, that went to the military, to go to chapel when they were in basic training, because that happens obviously on Sunday mornings, and you have to let people go to church if they want to go. So you can go then to church for basically an hour and a half. Like you've got time to get down there, time to get back, and you've got this time that you're at church, and you sit in a typically air-conditioned building. You listen, sing some songs, and you're not cleaning toilets. So my advice to sending people to basic training, my recruits, was go to church on Sunday, go to chapel, because you'll get, at least you won't be cleaning toilets. And I guess that's an incentive, but nobody in the chaplain corps, nobody was necessarily actively on a Billy Graham mission to save people. They were present. They provided most of what a chaplain does is a lot of counseling, to be honest with you. So they are essentially counselors. That the difference is like they have military counselors as well that are secular, that are not chaplains. And the school districts already have guidance counselors, and we also have resources available to us for additional mental health counseling. And so those are secular and not faith-based. They're certainly not chaplains. If you went to a chaplain in the military, you were not necessarily seeking you were seeking counsel, and that counseling that was being provided wasn't necessarily like, they don't start out like, what's your relationship with God as a chaplain? That may come up. It might not ever come up with a secular counselor in the military. And so for that reason, since George Washington, chaplains have been an option for soldiers to be able to say, I want to get some counseling. I'm not right. My girlfriend, I got the Jody letter, and my girlfriend broke up with me, or my wife left me, or whatever it happens to be, and I'm having problems back at home, or I'm not getting this military life, or I've seen some things that are really crushing me spiritually, and it's plaguing my mind. And in addition to whatever other types of counseling or mental health treatment that they may be getting, a chaplain can provide those things. And counseling for the chaplaincy is their primary responsibility. They like being able to give their little homilies and do their chapel, their chapel services in the chaplaincy, but they do not. That's like a tiny part of what they actually get to do, and so it's counseling. And so if you go to a chaplain, you know that you're choosing somebody that is providing counseling, but doing so with a background in faith. And so there's value to that, because I personally believe that there isn't much cure to anything mental, emotional, to some degree physical, that without the hand of God and the work of the Holy Spirit. I won't say to some degree. Everything is under the hand of God. So there is. But that's how I was raised, so I believe that, and I think that there's value. So when folks in the military would go see the chaplain, those chaplains would provide help, and if that person on the counseling side, by listening, and then if they wanted additional, faith-based assistance, the chaplain was capable of doing that. And so I could see the value and the argument behind having chaplains in, say, like a high school, where they would you have your guidance counselor, you have your other mental health resources, but there's also a chaplain, and maybe you feel the ability, or you're compelled to go and talk to somebody that has a background in faith. But my problem with it is that what the military demands of chaplains, as far as their they are not allowed to proselytize. They're not on a campaign to win souls for God through Christ. And so that eliminates the concern of whether your Sikh chaplain is going to offend the Jewish chaplain, who's going to irritate the Catholic chaplain, or you're certainly going to irritate the evangelical chaplain who wants to win all the souls they can. And so you avoid the proselytization severely in the military. And this seems like a good idea for those reasons, as we've already discussed, but that to me defeats the purpose of having a counselor in faith. Because the rules that any government puts on faith when it comes into their little corner of business, whether it's in the public school or the United States military, the rules that the secular government puts on faithful people in those positions denudes their ability to serve in the capacity that ultimately we want them to be able to do. So my argument against it is understanding those things, and it sounds like it would be a good thing, is that you would be putting the rules would be so absurd upon people that were, to make it ecumenical, to make it, just all the, it defeats the purpose. What would be better is if our communities presented, and you don't need the government, you don't need the legislature to do this. A good school board will say, we recognize the value in our community of faith, and we recognize the value to life and education and pursuing and developing as a human being the spiritual side of life. And without advocating for a particular faith or advocating for a particular denomination, it would be better if it was apparent to the school body, all of the students, who the faith leaders, the pastors and the assistant pastors and the counselors that were affiliated with their denominations, their faiths in each community, who they were, and that they were available to talk to, free of charge, and that those people then would have the ability to be come into the school upon request of a student and be able to minister to them counseling, to hear them, to listen to them, to not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to provide a report of, this kid's messed up or, whatever. Obviously. So I think that's a better way to allow people who are already trained as chaplains, because they're pastors and they're in the faith community and they're in town already, to be able to do their job and assist in this way, and that's not a bad thing, and we recognize, and that's a better way. In the same way, it's better if you have raised your child from the beginning in a faithful home. That's better than sending them to Sunday school and not going to church and hoping that they get it, whatever it is, because they're not really necessarily teaching, from Genesis to Revelation in Sunday school either. They're not doing that in churches. Why would they be doing that, on the Sunday service? They're not doing that on Sunday school. So it's better if people have the opportunity to see that it's an option, to understand who they can talk to, and that the schools facilitate that meeting as a way to help the kid. And then you don't have anybody, you don't have to create another paid position. It's not about money, but school districts are already in that weird. And look, I don't really know what chaplains in the military do the rest of the time. I didn't ever need to talk to a chaplain. Well, that's not true. It's not that I never needed to talk to a chaplain. It's like I never needed to see a chaplain for counseling. And I thought some of the chaplains were kind of weirdos. And who knows if they were even good? Maybe like how they say that the doctors in the military are the doctors that got C's in medical school. So maybe those are the pastors that they're not going to be getting that assignment that they were hoping for. I don't know. So that's probably what we would get in public schools for that same reason. I just think that when the government, the secular government, gets involved, even if the law is initiated by faithful people in government, that will the actual output result would be very different from what they had intended, and that there are better ways to do that. And by the way, God prefers it when you choose Him. When you repent from your sins and you go to God, versus having the Spanish Inquisition come and force it upon you, or what the Catholics did as they missioned across the southwest of the United States and so very other places across the world. So there's a better way, and that's something that we need to have those type of conversations about, versus what occurred on Friday at the legislative session. So that was the thing that I wanted to talk about that. The government effect on faithful chaplains would be, I think, not what the initiators of this particular type of legislation would want. Wrap up a couple of things here. I had some comments, mostly from my mom, about Trump's tariffs. A lot of people are for Trump, and a lot of people are for tariffs, and because they're for Trump, and that's fine. Look, it's a gamble. I mean, it's our money, so why not gamble it? Take it to the casino, and roll the dice. It could work out very well if we get $0 parity on everything. So like there are no tariffs in the entire world, and everybody's just truly free trade. That's a libertarian, fiscal libertarian's dream, that we're just able to go by back and forth. But that would mean that we wouldn't be getting millions of dollars, billions of dollars, lots of money, trillions maybe, for the Treasury as a way to offset the Trump tax breaks that you get renewed here. They set to expire, sunset in 2025 this year. So maybe that's a way to try to offset it with these tariffs. But my argument stands. Tariffs raise prices, reduce quality, and protect certain industries. And so it's the government making picks, and they're picking their favorites. Obama did that, and people were all upset with Solyndra and the whole green energy farce that has been going on for the last decade and a half now. the Republicans did it, even under Bush and these other things. But tariffs in general, that's what they do. They're going to raise your prices. The prices don't come down unless you do achieve $0 parity, across the world. And I know that the news right now says that there's like 50 countries that have come around in this last week, and they say they're going to deal with Trump. It's like, yeah, but until it's the EU, until it's Canada, until it's China, doesn't matter, because Honduras doesn't matter. But it's claimed as a victory, which is what's going to happen. My guess is that this is a tool to use countries to correct some of their practices, and that's what people want. That's a good thing. As long as if we achieve parity, then it is what it is. But it doesn't reduce prices, and it's still a tax on the consumer. And if any of that occurs, it's going to be seen as a victory and waved as a flag. And Trump is an economical genius, and his supporters will say that, and other supporters. And I'm a supporter of Trump, so I like everything. 75-80% of what he's doing is great, and then some of these things, it's just not as efficient as maybe it could be. And I need folks to understand this too. Like the stock market, everybody says stock market doesn't. A lot of people say stock market doesn't matter. Obviously, it does matter. And the ones that scream that the dip in the stock market is going to lead us to recession or to depression and all that other stuff, that's not going to happen because of tariffs either. There needs to be stability. And one could argue, if you were on the other side, and I haven't heard this argument yet, but if Trump did this with tariffs on purpose, knowing that it would take a short-term dip in the market, that's just a signal for people to buy when prices are down, which is this week. Last week, they weren't down far enough. This week, as things continue to go down, will probably be the time that I've heard people say, well, it's probably the time to buy. So one could argue that if you were a person that believed that Trump is just out there to take care of himself and his rich friends, whatever that means, then this is, you can make that argument. It's like, well, we're going to go ahead and use tariffs across the board. We've pretty much telegraphed when we're going to do it, beginning April, on April 2nd. And we're going and then give it a 10 to 15 day period, and the stock market will not collapse, but go down far enough so that it'll be useful for people to invest. And maybe there's a market correction, which sometimes is needed anyway, and we'll see what happens. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in that because it is better to buy stocks when they're lower than when they're at their peak, right? So I guess there might be a silver lining in that regard. But typically what people do is they get freaked out and then they sell because they think that everything's going to disappear, and ultimately it just creates an opportunity for other people to buy your stock that you sold but at a lower price and then continue to move forward. So I guess that's what this week is all about. The tariffs at least will provide an opportunity to buy into the stock market at lower prices. Of course, you have to be able to afford buying into the stock market, and maybe people's investment plans and brokers and we'll take advantage of that. So that's something I guess that you could look at as a positive. But once this is all squared away, the prices and the prices will go up and the quality will go down, and it'll be a wash, potentially a wash, hopefully not a wash. We'll see if this part could work out where people actually do bring jobs back to the United States and get a hard number on what it actually is. As we talked about last week, it cost almost $1 million per job between 2016 and 2018 with those tariffs on washing machines. And so maybe not as awesome as it sounds, but that's never how it's presented on Fox News or any other echo chamber. And CNN and those echo chambers, MSNBC are claiming that the world is falling and that the stock market's never going to recover, which that's not true either. So there we are. In the news also last week, and this is something that I do have some knowledge about, whereas maybe not so much with world economics. But Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, decided that he signed an executive order on, I think, March 31st. So that was last Monday when the last episode came out. He did this and just said, or maybe it was the 30th. Maybe it happened on the 30th. Anyway, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, signed an order to return combat arms in the Department of Defense standards to just to being universal for men and women. So there's not a difference in fitness or readiness standards in combat arms. So in the Army, anyway, I'm not an expert in the other branches, but in the Army, for combat arms, you're talking about obviously the infantry, the artillery, there's the cavalry, and special forces, so on and so forth. So combat engineers, I suppose. There are a few MOSs which he referenced in his clips, and MOS is military occupational specialty. So whatever job you have in the military, there are standards. There are technical standards associated with that are determined by your ASVAB score, the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, which is just everybody's got to take that. You get line scores that determine or predict your acumen for being able to be trained in certain fields. The higher the score, the more fields you're able to be trained in. And then there are obviously the physical requirements of every particular job, and they vary. So, for instance, the infantry is to do that job, you have to be on the front lines. Like that's where the infantry conducts its business, is close personal combat, engaging with enemy forces and destroying them, one-on-one, face-to-face, and that's how you take the land. The Air Force can bomb the hell out of a country from 60,000 feet, but you still got to get somebody in there to kick indoors and clean up the mess. And so the Army's been doing that for a very long time, and there are requirements that you have. The gear that a person wears in combat is fairly heavy, and it's for protective purposes. And you have to have all your material. You have to have your ammo. You have to have your equipment, and all of these things. And so you become a heavy person. So if you're a 210-pound man and you have 60 pounds of gear, you're now 270 pounds of dead weight, and you need to be moved. And so that's probably a two-person shuffle anyway for anybody, but it would be very difficult for a 150-pound or 130-pound, 140-pound female with 50 pounds of gear on to be able to also move. Not impossible, and so that's what the argument is. In the artillery, you have to pick up great big artillery shells, and you have to be able to load them, and they have to be able to go in the cannon, and they have to, there's a time associated with that, the ability to make it happen, and they're not light, and you have to move these things around and set them up, and so on and so forth, and again, with the cavalry, there's if you've ever had to break a track on a tank or an Abrams or a Bradley, or any other type of fighting vehicle, you know how physically challenging that can be, even though they ride to battle. That was a little dig on the Cav. I was in the 4-7 Cav for a while after the light infantry. So anyway, there's just a lot of physical work as you might imagine. It's difficult, and the point is that Hegseth is making, and I agree, is that you have to be able to do that job. And we have physical conditions now. So there, in the Army, there's an ACFT, and that replaced the APFT, which is primarily what I spent my 26 years in the military enjoying. The APFT, which is 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. And based on your age and your gender, then that would determine whether or not you passed. And those standards changed periodically. So the other part of it is the height and weight principle, right? So I came from the artillery, which is combat arms, and when you work as a forward observer, I was with the infantry. That's where you spend your time, or with the cavalry, and always out front, right? That's where you're supposed to be. So I didn't have a particularly useful job in the civilian world. Like the army, like the military is like, get that valuable training that your employer in the future will appreciate. I was like, yeah, but I mean, blowing things up, it's not really a useful skill. in the local job market, I must say. So that's maybe not true. It's a little bit of an advertising situation. But in the military across the board, you do have to meet the standards. You got to be able to look good in your uniform. You have to fit into that uniform. You have to be able to physically do your job. And one of the problems that human beings have is they get too fat. And so if you body fat is measured in the Army anyway, by measuring for a male, measuring the neck and the waist level around at the belly button. So if you got a big fat belly and a skinny neck, you're screwed. You're too fat, and that's how we determined what your body fat is. There's a whole calculation table that's associated with that. If you're a female, they measure your neck and they measure your waist at the narrowest part of the waist, so that varies. It may not be at the belly button; it may be higher up under the rib cage. But they do measure your hips, and so if you got a big butt, it's going to catch up with you. And as a combat arms guy from way back, at least way back now, back in the 20th century, you would see people, whether it was Fort Drum or Fort Sill or Korea or wherever it happened to be, and you'd see we all knew what the male standards were because there were no females in combat arms, and then you would see females in the military, and they would you'd be like, how does that big butt woman possibly meet the standards for height and weight, and if she had a big neck, like a linebacker neck, she'd probably be okay. And if she had a narrow waist, like Sir Mix-a-Lot would like, and then maybe everything else would be okay. So there was a whole formula associated with that, but it was not equal. So I don't know if that will change. I don't know if figuring height and weight, height is pretty straightforward. How tall are you? And you try to stand up as tall as you could and suck in as long as you could and not breathe and everything like that and make yourself look like you have a narrower waist and blow out your neck a little bit so that you would be always able to pass tape. Because there's fat guys in the military too that have been around for, and you're like, how's that person pass tape? And so it leads to questioning about integrity on who's doing the taping, which is how they measure people. So that's always been a concern because the last thing, it does degrade the teamwork within the community of warfighters. If you are suspicious that the out of shape chubbo that is with you is not able to do, they're not going to be there. They're not going to have your back. And then you're looking at that person going, they're slow. They're going to get in trouble. They're going to get hurt. And I'm going to have to drag their fat butt out of here. So it's not just about height and weight and fit, whether people's fat or whatever, but it is their ability to do the job. Now, I served with many people of all backgrounds and men and women and their variety of abilities to do any job physically. And so the argument has always been it doesn't take a penis to pull a trigger, and that is correct, which is why everybody in the military is required to have a, you have to, every year you have to qualify on your rifle, and you have to meet those standards. So those standards remain the same. However, it doesn't take a penis to be able to pick up a 300 person dead weight and pull that person to safety. Or maybe it's just flipping a log so that you can have a fighting position or whatever it happens to be. There's myriad possibilities of strength required in combat arms. You just have to be able to do it. So the infantry in the Army already has an additional test. There are some the ACFT, which is what is used in the Army right now, which replaced the APFT, was based on 20 years of research of saying maybe just doing push-ups and sit-ups and running isn't exactly relative to how the jobs we're supposed to be able to do. So one of the things that occurred in that situation was, say, for truck drivers who are not combat arms, they're combat service support or combat support, they would and females have been in truck driving forever. They have got to be able to pass the heavy version of the ACFT. And the reason for that is because they have to be able, it's a lot of loading and unloading and of stuff on trucks. And those tires on those vehicles are not light. You have to be able to change a tire in combat. And so you got to be able to do that stuff. And so their tasks are harder than other jobs in the military. So like, let's say you are a paper pusher, a 42 Alpha. Like, yeah, I mean, carrying a ream of paper, I guess that's about the extent of it. And I'm being a little facetious there, but it's different than even combat service and combat service support jobs in that regard. So Pete Hegseth is right. It doesn't remove the ability of females to serve in combat arms, but everybody has to be able to pass the same test in combat arms. And there are plenty of other jobs. In fact, most jobs are not combat arms. Believe it or not, most jobs are combat service and service support. So and that's how it is in the Army. The Marines have already done this. They've been doing that at the same standard for males and females since 2016, when Obama told everybody that they're going to do this. We're going to have women in combat arms. It was basically a political victory. There was enough crying at the top of female generals and colonels who weren't getting their opportunities to be generals because they didn't have combat experience that they decided they were going to put women in combat MOSs and jobs, and that was just basically for politics, which resulted in more women did become commanders of combat arms, and that gave them combat experience, quote unquote. It's not like they were on the front lines fighting, but they were if I'm a commander of an infantry and I'm a woman, like by the time you got to be a commander of, say, an infantry battalion, so as a lieutenant colonel, like you came from another branch and now you have gotten into this position, you probably haven't got a lot of actual combat experience, but you've led combat troops in combat, right? So there's that. Anyway, it was a win in that regard, in that people got the opportunity to be promoted if you were a female into higher level positions based on your combat experience. But the standards still were not the same, and so we all kind of knew it was a joke, and the Marines knew it was a joke, and they just told Obama, we're gonna take this into consideration. We're gonna do a study, but we're gonna go with what our study says. And so kudos to the Marines for doing their own thing. And so they have women in combat arms jobs, but they have to maintain the same standards. So now everybody else is coming in line, which is good. And that is how it's supposed to be. And that means that there are still a lot of men, there are many men who are qualified to do jobs in the military, but they're not qualified for combat arms jobs physically, right? And to be fair, there are a lot of people in combat arms jobs who are able physically to do the job, but mentally they do not meet some of the technical requirements of other jobs in the military. So it kind of works out. It works out. But to be honest with you, there are not a ton of females that are dying to get into the combat arms. They're not. I mean, it's just like when they eliminated Don't Ask, Don't Tell from the military too under Obama. I was a recruiter at the time, and I'm like, great. Now there's going to be a line out my door of people who want to join the military. Not a thing changed. Nothing changed. And so when females had the ability to become to join combat arms, of the females that we put in when I was recruiting or in charge of recruiting, maybe we did put some females into combat arms jobs, but not very many because they didn't want to. And that is interesting. So what Hegseth is doing is the right thing to do. It does actually equalize everything. They still have the ability to do it, but they have to prove, just like everybody else, that the male has to prove that they have the ability to stay in those jobs. And my advice to anybody in the infantry is, if you want to go into the infantry, you can do that for about 10 years. And then you're so broken after that, depending on what your deployment schedule was, you probably should do something else anyway. So keep your options open across the board. Now that reminds me of with the women in combat arms situation in Hollywood recently, and this is a pet peeve of mine. We've got just a ton of movies, TV shows, streaming videos and all this other stuff, where the heroines are these amazing, female, they're combatants, they're just like practical ninjas. And you see, female assassins that are out there and they are just killing all of these dudes, and they're fighting, a 110-pound woman is just knocking out these 300-pound dudes. And that is not how it works. I'm sorry. No. And you can train, and you can be fit, and you can be you can be a master at all these other things. But it's just and it's not saying that you couldn't be, you couldn't get some good licks in and probably even get some kills in there if you were a female assassin. But my wife and I watch these shows, and I'm like, okay. And she's like, and even she's like, yeah, that's probably not how that really works. And it isn't how it works. If for nothing else than just being able to, bear hug a person to death. It doesn't, work the other way. And so there is a difference between male and female strength, generally speaking, like vastly generally speaking, which is not to say that there aren't some women who can. It's just a little ridiculous that all of these TV shows and movies, like now all of the women are like assassins, and they're just amazing at this stuff. And I'm like, okay, no, I don't believe that any more than I believe that the stormtroopers couldn't shoot straight in any Star Wars movie, So that's my take on Hollywood. I'm over it. No thanks. I appreciate it. Now, the last thing I'm going to take off with is Alumni Weekend. In Forest City, our little town here, one of the cool things we've been doing for like 37 years is what's called the annual the alumni tournament. It's what we call it. It's just basketball games with the classes that have graduated from high school, and they come back and they get their classmates together and they put together a basketball team, and they run a tournament against other classes. And as you get older and things move on, you start merging classes because you can't get all of people from that want to play basketball anymore to come and play. And so you merge some classes, and then at a certain point, you just merge a decade, and next thing you know, you're playing the 80s team or whatever it happens to be. And it's always very exciting for the first, for particularly the very first year after high school. So our son Jack just graduated last year from high school. He's in his freshman year at Waldorf University, and they had their alumni team, and they lost two, and so that knocked them out, but they won. Let's see, they won one and lost two. I think that's something like that. Maybe they won two and lost two. I don't know. Anyway, you lose two and you're out of the tournament is how it works. So but his friends got together, and they had their first time to, buy their alumni jerseys, whatever they wanted to do. And they did, and they looked good, and not good enough to win, but they did have a better Saturday than they had for a Sunday. And then our son Tanner came back, and he played with his team. They also had their 10-year class reunion. And so that was fun to see everybody in that. And they actually are the runners up. They came in second place in their division. So that was surprising because they lost initially, but then they fought their way all the way back and ended up coming up second. So it's a fun weekend. I participated in that for a long time. I mean, our group still has. We're one of those combined teams now that it's like basically the early '90s team. And I haven't played in that game in that tournament probably for 10 years. I'm not good at basketball to begin with, and I don't particularly enjoy maybe all of the I guess, how do I say this? I think our class did it wrong. Maybe this is a Gen X thing. And I'm reminded of this, by the way, that, my kids, when will call me and we'll go get them if they're out with their friends and they've been drinking. Then we'll go get them. And if it's 2:00 in the morning, we'll go get them because we want them to be safe. And they know that, and they do take advantage of that, which is fine, and that's what we prefer. And there's no lecture associated with that because it's preferred to do it that way. And they've just been like that, like always. And so, once they've come to that point in their life, they've been very responsible. So they're better at that than my generation was. We were partiers, and we never thought about calling our parents to come and get us, because we hid everything. We didn't want to deal with a lecture. We didn't want to hear about it, and we wanted to get away with it, and we thought we were, who knows, and so just dumb. And we did, because of that, we had bad practices, and including, in this particular case, for most of my experience with the alumni weekend is that's what it was all about. It was you play basketball so that you can go to the bar afterwards or before, and then you end up telling the same stories, and after a while, the women in our lives, because it was all guys that played. It's not that way anymore, but it was just like back in the day with Combat Arms, and they got tired of listening to the same dumb stories and staying in the same dumb places, and so they quit going. So it's not a family really event; it's not a couples event, and it was. So it kind of just I lost interest about a decade ago. Other people lost earlier from our class, like they lost interest. But our kids and our younger, the younger groups, as I've watched this weekend, they get it. They socialize, they go out, they include everybody. Spouses and significant others are welcome and part of it, and they make the right choices most of the time. And I think they're doing it right. And so it's fun to see our kids play. I can't believe Tanner's been out of high school for 10 years, and see how they have grown up and developed, and who they are. And man, time sure does fly. It is crazy to see your kids grow up and realize that of the four boys, 3 of them are out of school, and Colin's left, and in just another 3 years he's going to be in the same boat as Jack was, and he's got a pretty good class of basketball players. So we'll look forward to watching them play, and it is fun to see them play terrible basketball, to cheer on the teams, because the kids from the different years, and to make that a part of our small community where everybody once a year, not everybody, but they have the opportunity to come back and to visit our small town and to see each other, to socialize, and to just kind of reignite whatever relationships and memories they had from when they were in high school, from this one high school town that we live in rural America. That's an awesome thing. And maybe that's something that you and I can do in general. So we don't have to wait for once a year opportunities to reach out to people with whom we graduated from high school or from college, people that we used to work with, people that we think about every so often, that cross our minds or cross our social media pages that we haven't talked to in a while. Maybe it's a reminder to all of us that we have the opportunity, not just now and then, but whenever we want to just reach out, say hello, how you doing? And maybe we can all be a little bit of a chaplain ourselves. And as long as the rest of the world that are the student body of our friends know that we're available to talk and to listen. And then we can help be the sunny side to someone else's life.
When the shadows fall and doubts begin to creep, remember together we're strong, never weak. Lift your neighbor up with kindness every day. Let your actions speak the words you want to say.
The Sunny Side of Life is a weekly production about our life on the family farmstead here in Iowa, the liberties we prize, and the pursuits which make us happy. None of this is possible, of course, without Christ in our lives. For the Lord God is our sun and our shield. He gives us grace and glory.
Be the sunny side of someone else's life. Share your light and joy through struggle and strife. Keep your heart open and your soul always bright. Together we will share this sunny side life. Be the sunny side of someone else's life. Share your light and joy through struggle and strife. Sunnyside life.
May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the sunny side of your life in Christ be made evident unto you each and every day, and give you peace.